A raging river roars through Arizona's untamed heart in 1876, where a 10-year-old girl in a black and white dress and oversized cowboy hat dares to defy its fury. Clara Boone, alone after her father's disappearance, plunges into the flood to save a wounded Apache warrior, whispering a promise that will ignite a battle for truth. Her courage will unravel a conspiracy that could shatter the frontier, or forge an unlikely bond that echoes beyond the desert. Will her vow survive the shadows of betrayal? Subscribe now to uncover the secrets of Devil's River. Share where you're tuning in from, and hold tight. 3 days of danger and destiny await, with twists you'll never see coming. The spring of 1876 had turned Arizona's Devil's River into a snarling beast, its waters churning with mud and wrath after days of relentless rain. The sky hung low, gray as gunmetal, casting shadows over the red rock canyons that cradled the river's fury. Clara Boone, a wiry 10-year-old in a black and white dress and a brown vest, trudged through the drizzle, her father's oversized cowboy hat flopping over her brow. Her boots sank into the sodden earth as she led her pony, Rusty, toward the rickety cabin she called home. 3 days ago, her father, a hunter with a laugh like rolling thunder, had ridden out after deer and never returned. Now, Clara was alone, her world shrinking to the creak of the cabin and the river's endless roar. She tied Rusty to the post, her small hands trembling from the cold. The air smelled of wet sage and danger. As she glanced at the river, something caught her eye. A dark shape tumbling in the frothing current, caught between jagged rocks and splintered cottonwood branches. At first, she thought it was debris, another victim of the flood's hunger. Then, an arm broke the surface, fingers clawing at the air, desperate and alive. Her heart lurched. Without a thought, she kicked off her boots, tossed her hat to the mud, and plunged into the icy torrent. The water hit like a fist, cold enough to steal her breath and burn her lungs. It yanked at her dress, wrapping the fabric around her legs like a trap. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but those fingers, still grasping above the foam, belonged to someone who'd die if she did. Clara fought the current, her arms pumping, her braid whipping like a rope in the wind. She reached the figure, a man, his bronze face half submerged, blood streaming from a wound in his chest. His dark eyes flickered with pain and defiance, locking onto hers as she hooked her arm under his shoulders. "Hold on," she gasped, her voice lost in the river's howl. He was heavy, his body limp as the current slammed them against a rock. Clara's ribs ached, but she clung to him, her nails digging into his buckskin shirt. She knew this river, its bends, its eddies, its deadly rapids just downstream that had claimed lives last spring. With a grunt, she angled them toward a fallen cottonwood, its roots still gripping the bank. Her hands, raw and bleeding, seized the branches, and she hauled the man toward the shallows. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold as river stone. "I'll never leave you," she whispered, the words torn from her lips by exhaustion and a stubborn spark of hope. "I won't let you go." On the muddy bank, Clara collapsed beside him, her chest heaving. The man was Apache, his long black hair plastered to his face, a silver sun and water pendant glinting at his throat. She checked his wound, a bullet hole, the entry marked by a scorched emblem of the U.S. Army. This wasn't a criminal. He was a hunted man. As she tore a strip from her dress to staunch the blood, her fingers brushed something in his pocket, a sodden scrap of paper. She unfolded it, her breath catching. The handwriting was her father's, unmistakable, scrawled in haste. "Take it to Eagle's Peak. The truth lies there." Clara's world tilted. How did her father know this man? What truth was worth dying for? She dragged him toward the cabin, her small frame straining under his weight. The rain stung her face, but she didn't falter. Inside, she stoked the fire, its glow casting shadows on the rough-hewn walls. She draped her father's old shirt over the stranger, her hands shaking as she pressed cloth to his wound. His eyes fluttered, but he didn't stir. The pendant gleamed in the firelight, a silent promise of secrets yet to unravel. Clara's mind raced. Her father's note, the Apache's wound, the river's rage. She was just a girl, but the frontier didn't care. It demanded courage, and she'd give it. If this story's pulling you in, folks, hit that subscribe button. It keeps these tales alive, and I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Clara's got more to face, and the river's got more to tell. Stick with her. The fire crackled as Clara sat back, her father's note clutched in her hand. Outside, the Devil's River roared on, guarding its truths and daring her to chase them. She didn't know who this man was or why her father's words had led her to him. But she knew one thing. She'd made a promise, and in this wild land, a promise was as binding as blood. As Clara sat by the fire, her father's cryptic note still gripped in her small hand, the Devil's River roared outside, its secrets buried in the churning depths. The Apache warrior, Tahan, lay motionless under her father's shirt, his silver pendant catching the firelight like a beacon in the dark. Clara's mind wrestled with the mystery, her father's words pointing to Eagle's Peak, a place she'd only heard in whispers, a jagged scar on the horizon where truths were said to hide. The weight of her promise to Tahan pressed against her chest, as heavy as the storm clouds over Arizona in that wild spring of 1876. She didn't know what lay ahead, but the river had brought her this far, and she'd follow its call. The dawn broke cold and gray, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. Clara knelt beside Tahan, checking his wound. The bleeding had slowed, but his skin was clammy, his breath shallow. She tore another strip from her dress to tighten the bandage, her fingers steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. The cabin's walls creaked under the wind's assault, but a new sound cut through, a low, rhythmic thud of hooves, growing louder, closer. Clara's heart leaped. She darted to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. 3 riders emerged from the mist, their silhouettes sharp against the red rock cliffs. Sheriff Rusk, his badge glinting like a warning. Captain Calloway, ramrod straight in his army blues. And Kane, the merchant, whose eyes glinted sharper than his polished boots. Clara smoothed her vest, pushed her damp braid back, and stood tall despite her small frame. She opened the door just as Rusk's fist raised to knock, the sound like a gavel on her nerves. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, her voice steady but thin, a child's defiance against men who carried death in their holsters. Rusk's weathered face was hard as flint. "Clara Boone, we're hunting a killer Apache. Robbed a gold transport, left bodies in the dust. Have you seen anyone out here?" His eyes scanned the cabin, lingering on the mud-tracked floor. "I ain't seen nobody," Clara lied, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. "Just me and Rusty, weathering the storm." Kane dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud. He stepped closer, too close, his breath sour with tobacco. "Funny thing, kid," he drawled, crouching to trace a finger along a smear of blood on the floorboards. "This looks fresh. You sure you're alone?" Clara's pulse hammered, but she held his gaze. "River's been tossing up all kinds of mess, probably from a deer I dressed yesterday." Calloway, silent until now, leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes cold as the river's depths. "Your pa was a meddler, Clara, always poking into things that didn't concern him. Hope you're not taking after him." The mention of her father stung, but before she could snap back, a faint rustle came from the shadows behind her. Not Tahan. He was too weak to move. Something else. Someone else. A whisper, low and urgent, drifted from the back of the cabin. "Don't let them take the ledger." Clara froze, her skin prickling. Who was hiding in her home? She forced a shrug, stepping in front of the bloodstain. "If you're done sniffing around, I've got chores to do." Kane's smile was a blade, but Rusk waved him off. "We'll be back, girl," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with threat. "If you're hiding that Apache, this river'll swallow you both." As their horses faded into the mist, Clara slammed the door and spun around, her eyes searching the dark corners. A figure darted past the back window, a fleeting shadow, gone before she could blink. Her breath caught. Was it a friend of Tahan's, or someone tied to her father's note? Tahan stirred, his eyes opening, pain etched in their depths. "Who was here?" he rasped, his voice thick with effort. Clara knelt beside him, her mind racing. "They're hunting you," she said, "but there's someone else out there. Someone who knows about a ledger." Tahan's gaze sharpened, but he shook his head, confused. "I don't know. But the ledger, it's in Devil's Canyon. Proof of their lies." Clara's fingers tightened around her father's note. The shadow, the ledger, Eagle's Peak. It was all connected. A puzzle her father had left her to solve. This tale's just getting started, folks, and it's a wild ride. If you're hooked, hit that subscribe button. It keeps stories like Clara's alive. Tell me where you're listening from, and let's see where this river takes us. The truth's out there, and Clara's chasing it. She stood, her small frame taut with resolve. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in with secrets. Whoever had whispered from the shadows knew more than she did, and that scared her more than the riders. But Clara Boone wasn't one to back down. The Devil's River had given her Tahan, and maybe that shadow too. Whatever truth waited at Eagle's Peak, she'd find it, or die trying. Clara Boone stood in the dim cabin, her father's note crumpled in her fist, the echo of the stranger's whisper, "Don't let them take the ledger," still ringing in her ears. The Devil's River growled outside, its rage a mirror to the storm brewing in her heart. Tahan, the wounded Apache, lay propped against the wall, his dark eyes searching hers for answers she didn't have. The shadow that fled her cabin had left more questions than clues, but one thing was clear. The truth her father pointed to at Eagle's Peak was tied to Tahan's ledger, and men like Sheriff Rusk and Captain Calloway would kill to keep it buried. In the wild Arizona of 1876, a 10-year-old girl was about to become their reckoning. The fire in the hearth sputtered as Clara shoved another log into the flames, the air thick with the scent of smoke and damp wood. She glanced at Tahan, his chest rising unevenly under her father's shirt, the silver pendant at his throat glinting like a star in the gloom. "You said the ledger's in Devil's Canyon," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her insides. "What's in it?" Tahan's jaw tightened, pain and memory warring in his gaze. "Names," he rasped. "Dates. Gold shipments. Proof that Calloway's men killed my kin. Blamed us for their theft." His words hung heavy, each one a stone in the river of lies that had drowned so many. Clara paced the creaking floorboards, her bare feet silent against the wood. The note from her father burned in her mind. Eagle's Peak. The truth. A puzzle she was only beginning to piece together. "My pa knew something," she said, holding up the crumpled paper. "He wrote this. Told you to go to Eagle's Peak. Why?" Tahan shook his head, his breath ragged. "I saw him. 2 nights before the flood. He warned me about soldiers. Said they'd frame my people. Gave me that paper. Told me to hide." Clara's heart stuttered. Her father, a hunter who'd taught her to track and shoot, had been tangled in this conspiracy. And now he was gone, swept away by the same river that had delivered Tahan to her door. A sharp rap at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Clara froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the old hunting knife on the table. Tahan tensed, his eyes darting to the shadows where the stranger had lurked. She crept to the window, peering through the warped glass. A lone figure stood outside, cloaked in a rain-soaked poncho, her face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. "Clara Boone," a woman's voice called, low and urgent. "Open the door. I ain't here to harm you." Clara hesitated, then unlatched the door, keeping the knife ready. The woman stepped inside, shaking off the rain. Mariah, a Mexican healer who roamed the territory selling herbs and poultices. Her dark eyes flicked to Tahan, then back to Clara, sharp with purpose. "You're in deep, Nina," Maria said, her voice rough as gravel. "Calloway's men are circling back, and they ain't just after him." She nodded at Tahan. "They know you're hiding something, and Kane's sniffing for blood." Clara's stomach twisted. Maria knelt by Tahan, inspecting his wound with practiced hands, her fingers deft as she applied a pungent salve from her satchel. "I worked at their fort," she continued, her tone low. "Saw Calloway burn Apache camps, steal their gold, pin it on warriors like him. Your pa caught wind of it, Clara. That's why he's gone." Clara's throat tightened, the weight of her father's fate pressing down like a boulder. Maria pulled a folded paper from her satchel, its edges worn but intact. "Found this in the fort's trash heap," she said, handing it to Clara. It was a letter, signed by Calloway, ordering a raid on an Apache village to secure resources. Clara's hands shook as she read, the words blurring through unshed tears. "This proves it," she whispered. "They killed to steal." Maria nodded grimly. "And they'll kill you to keep it quiet. That ledger Tahan's got, it's their death sentence." Tahan struggled to sit up, his voice hoarse but fierce. "It's hidden in a cave, Devil's Canyon. I can guide you. But we must go now." Clara looked from the letter to Tahan, then to Maria. The cabin felt like a trap, its walls no match for the storm of men and lies closing in. "I'm going with him," she said, her voice small but iron-hard. Maria's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "You're a child, Clara. This ain't your fight." Clara stepped closer, her father's note and Calloway's letter clutched tight. "It's my pa's fight, and I ain't letting it die with him." Tahan met her gaze, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Tueka," he said softly, the Apache word for water. Life. Memory. You carry it, like your father." Maria sighed, packing her satchel. "Then I'm coming too. Someone's got to keep you both alive." Clara nodded, her heart pounding with purpose. The fire cast long shadows across the cabin, the flames dancing like spirits urging them forward. They'd leave at dusk, under cover of the storm, to find the ledger and unravel the truth. But as Clara slipped her father's note into her vest, she couldn't shake the chill of that whispered voice from the shadows. Someone else was out there, watching, waiting. Friend or foe, she'd find out soon enough. The fire's dying embers cast a faint glow over Clara Boone's cabin, but the chill of the stranger's whisper lingered in her bones. Maria's warning and Calloway's damning letter weighed heavy in her vest, alongside her father's note, pointing to Eagle's Peak. Tahan's talk of a ledger in Devil's Canyon promised answers, but also danger. Men like Captain Calloway would burn the territory down to keep their secrets. As Clara, Tahan, and Maria prepared to slip into the storm's embrace, the Arizona night of 1876 closed around them like a noose. Clara tucked her father's knife into her belt, her 10-year-old heart pounding with a purpose bigger than her small frame. The truth was out there, and she'd chase it through hell itself. Dusk painted the sky in bruises of purple and gray as Clara led the way, her bare feet picking a silent path along the riverbank. Devil's Canyon loomed ahead, its red rock walls jagged as broken teeth against the fading light. Tahan limped behind, his wound slowing him, but not his resolve, his silver pendant glinting like a warning. Maria followed, her satchel slung low, eyes scanning the shadows for signs of pursuit. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone and sagebrush, the river's roar a constant companion. Clara's breath came quick, her mind racing. Calloway's men were close, and the mysterious shadow from her cabin could be friend or foe, trailing them still. They moved single file, the canyon's narrow trails forcing them to hug the cliffs. Clara's dress snagged on thorns, but she pressed on, teaching Tahan the English word courage as they climbed. He taught her tueka in return. Water, life, memory. His voice rough but steady. Your father had it, he said, nodding to her. You do too. Clara clutched the photo of her paw in her pocket, its edges worn from her touch. The canyon seemed to watch them, its silence heavy with secrets. Every rustle of leaves made Clara's hand twitch toward her knife, the stranger's whisper echoing, "Don't let them take the ledger." Halfway to the cave, a sharp crack split the air, a rifle shot. Clara dove behind a boulder, pulling Tahan down as Maria dropped beside them, her poncho flapping like a wounded bird. Dust exploded where the bullet struck, inches from their feet. Ambush! Maria hissed, her hands fumbling for a bandage as blood seeped from her side. They found us. Clara's heart thundered, but she peeked over the rock. Shadows moved on the ridge above. Calloway's soldiers, their blue coats stark against the crimson stone. Maria shoved a crumpled paper into Clara's hands, Calloway's signed order to massacre the Apache for gold. Keep it safe, Nina, she gasped, her face pale. Justice dies if you don't. Tahan grabbed Clara's arm, his eyes fierce despite the pain. The cave's close. We can make it. Clara nodded, her throat tight as she helped Maria stand. They scrambled down a narrow ledge, the river's spray slicking their path. Bullets whined past, kicking up dirt, but the canyon's twists hid them from sight. Maria stumbled, her breath ragged, but urged them on. Go, she whispered, slumping against a rock. I'll hold them here. Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes, but Maria's glare was iron. You're the truth now, Clara. Run. They reached the cave as night fell, its mouth a black gash in the canyon wall. Clara lit a match, its flicker revealing damp stone and the faint outline of a lightning bolt carving, Eagle's Peak's marker. Tahan pointed to a crevice, his hand shaking as he uncovered a leather-bound ledger, its pages scrawled with names and dates of stolen gold. Clara's fingers brushed the cover, her father's note flashing in her mind. This is it, she whispered, but her words were cut short by Maria's scream from outside. A gunshot followed, then silence. Clara's stomach lurched. She knew Maria was gone. Inside the cave, Tahan slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his bandage. Clara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tore another strip from her dress to bind his wound. You can leave me, she said, her voice small but fierce. Get this to your people. Tahan's hand closed over hers, his silver pendant catching the matchlight. Tueka brought you to me, he said. You saved my life. I won't let the river take yours. He pressed the pendant into her palm, its sun and water design warm against her skin. We finish this together. Footsteps echoed outside, Calloway's men closing in. Clara stuffed the ledger and Calloway's letter into her vest, her mind racing. The cave offered no escape, but her father's knife and Tahan's resolve were all she had. The canyon's walls seemed to pulse with the river's heartbeat, urging her to fight. Whatever waited outside, Clara Boone would face it, a 10-year-old girl carrying the weight of a territory's sins. Clara Boone clutched the ledger and Calloway's blood-stained letter, her small hands trembling in the cave's dim glow. Tahan's silver pendant, now hanging around her neck, felt warm against her skin, a tether to the promise she'd made by the raging Devil's River. The echo of Maria's final scream still haunted her, a reminder of the cost of truth in the Arizona Territory of 1876. Footsteps crunched outside, heavy and deliberate. Calloway's soldiers, their shadows creeping closer across the canyon walls. Clara's eyes met Tahan's, his gaze fierce despite the blood seeping through his bandage. The cave was a trap, but the truth in her hands was a weapon, and she'd wield it or die trying. The night was black as coal, the only light a sliver of moon slicing through the cave's mouth. Clara's breath hitched as she peered out, spotting the glint of rifle barrels on the ridge above. Calloway's voice cut through the dark, cold as a winter wind. "Come out, girl. You and that Apache can't hide forever." His words carried the weight of a man who'd burned villages to keep his secrets. Clara's fingers tightened around her father's knife, its blade worn but sharp. She whispered to Tahan, "We ain't got much time. What's the plan?" Tahan's jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the cave. "There," he said, nodding to a stack of old mining crates in the corner, their wood weathered, but marked with faded dynamite labels. "Fire can turn this trap into their grave." Clara's heart raced. She scrambled to the crates, her small frame ducking low as a bullet ricocheted off the cave wall. The crates held a few sticks of dynamite, brittle with age, but still deadly. Tahan dragged himself closer, his hand steady despite his pain, and pointed to a fuse coiled like a snake. "Light it when they're close," he said. "The blast'll bring the canyon down." Clara nodded, her throat dry as dust. She tucked the ledger and letter deeper into her vest, the pendant glinting against her chest. The river's roar outside seemed to urge her on, its rhythm a pulse of courage. Calloway's men advanced, their boots crunching on loose shale. Clara lit a match, its flame trembling in her hand as she crept to the cave's edge. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice cracking but defiant. "I got proof of what you did," Calloway laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Proof doesn't mean anything when you're dead, kid." He raised his rifle, and Clara's world slowed. She tossed the match toward the fuse, its spark catching as she dove behind a boulder. Tahan grabbed her arm, pulling her deeper into the cave as the fuse hissed. The explosion roared, a thunderclap that shook the earth. Rocks tumbled, sealing the cave's mouth and burying Calloway's men in a cascade of red stone. Dust choked the air, and Clara coughed, her ears ringing. She crawled to Tahan, who lay slumped against the wall, a shard of rock embedded in his side. "No," she gasped, her hands pressing against the fresh wound. "You can't go now." Tahan's eyes flickered, pain etched deep, but he managed a faint smile. "Tueka, you carried it," he whispered, touching the pendant at her neck. "You saved me. Twice." Clara's tears fell, mixing with the dust on his face. She tore another strip from her dress, binding his wound as best she could, but the cave was collapsing, its walls groaning under the weight of the blast. A faint light broke through the dust, dawn creeping over the canyon's rim. Clara dragged Tahan toward a narrow crack in the cave wall, her arms burning with the effort. They emerged on a ledge overlooking the river, its waters glinting gold in the morning sun. Clara's legs gave out, and she sank beside Tahan, the ledger and letter still safe in her vest. Hooves thundered in the distance, not soldiers this time, but a federal marshal's posse, their badges catching the light. The lead rider, Marshal Whitfield, dismounted. his weathered face grim but kind. "Clara Boone?" he called, spotting her small figure. "We got word of trouble out here." Clara stood, her cowboy hat tilted but proud, and handed him the ledger and Calloway's letter. "This is the truth," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "My pa died for it. So did Maria. Write it down. Write." Whitfield's eyes widened as he read the names and dates damning Calloway and his men for murder and theft. He nodded, his voice low. "You're a brave girl, Clara. This'll see justice done." Tahan stirred, his breathing shallow but alive. He met Clara's gaze, a silent promise passing between them. As the marshal's men secured the evidence, Clara looked out over the Devil's River, its current calmer now, reflecting the dawn's fire. The pendant hung heavy at her neck, a symbol of Tueka, life, memory, truth. Tahan would return to his people, and she'd carry on, a 10-year-old girl who'd faced a territory's sins and won. The river's song lingered, whispering of promises kept and justice born in the dust. The Devil's River has carried Clara Boone's tale to its end, her courage echoing through Arizona's wild heart. A 10-year-old girl faced a raging flood, betrayal, and a fight for truth, proving even the smallest can change history. What did her promise, "I'll never leave you," stir in you? Share your thoughts. Where are you listening from, and what moved you most? Your voices keep these frontier stories alive. I'm grateful for every moment you've spent with Clara and Tahan. Until we meet again by another river, under another dawn, keep chasing the truth. Join me for the next tale, where the West's secrets unfold anew.